words, leap and heart.
Leap heart, got it. Hi, and welcome to our Gazweta Executive MBA chat today. We'll be discussing our Modular Executive MBA program, and I am pleased to be joined with two of our very distinguished individuals, one a member of our faculty and one of our recent graduates. We're going to be talking today about the Executive MBA program's modular format and its optimal opportunities for the students interested. So a little bit of housekeeping before we get too far into it. Doug and John are going to be talking a bit about this, but during the entire chat, you should feel free to ask your questions through the system that's provided. You can email your questions in at any time, and we'll have them answered either on live camera or behind, where we have individuals to respond to your questions as well. If you don't hear your question answered here online, we might have to address it afterwards if the chat doesn't allow for it. Or if I hold your question, it may be because I'm aware that Doug and John are going to go over it when we get a little bit further into the presentation. I suspect it'll be about 30, 40 minutes today, but please feel free to keep your questions coming as you think of them. I don't want you to feel like you need to hold them, and we'll make sure we get them fielded in the correct manner. So before we get any further in it, I'm going to let Doug and John introduce themselves, and we'll get started.
Yes, my name is Doug Bowman. I'm a professor of marketing here at the Gazweta Business School, and I'm also co-director of the Emory Marketing Analytics Center. I've been here at Gazweta since 1999. My PhD is from the Wharton School, and I've taught in the modular format since its inception with the class of 2004.
Fabulous. John?
And I'm John Leapart. I'm the president of Leading Edge Consulting in Columbia, South Carolina. And I'm a 2014 graduate of the MEMBA program and one of Dr. Bowman's former students. My background is in aviation and finance, and I was very happy and very satisfied with the program, but I'm also very glad to be done.
I think it's funny that we're sitting here, both of us former students of Dr. Bowman's. I'm actually a graduate of the full-time program, so we're going to get a chance to talk a little bit more about that format. Before we go too far, I'm going to talk about the agenda. We're going to review over the class profile for the Modular Executive MBA program and talk about the residencies. So the residencies are our in-person, on-campus sections of the program that take place during the course of your 20-month program here. The distance learning are exactly what it sounds like, the portions in which you'll be studying when you're away from campus. And John's going to be able to talk a little bit about what that's like as a student, and Doug to be able to talk about how the courses are developed such that it can be facilitated from a distance. And then we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about the value of the degree, both what the curriculum can teach you, but also what an individual like John and others sort of takes away from the program. If you have questions related to any of those or anything else, like I mentioned, please feel free to submit them as they come along, and we'll make sure we get them fielded either on air or behind the scenes as necessary. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and move into talking about the Modular Executive MBA Class of 2016 and the cohort. So if you'll notice on the screen, you'll see that the class size is about 30 individuals, and the average age is 38.9 years, and the work is about close to 15 years. It's a 70-30 male-female split with a nice population of minority individuals that are in the classroom. Beneath it, you can see a little bit of what that diversity really means and how the classes are broken up into different areas, industries, functions, but also experience levels. And so I'd love to hear a little bit from Doug and John about how that kind of class makeup really manifests itself in the classroom, and as well what that feels like sort of as a student in that grouping. Doug?
Yeah, absolutely. And part of my job as an instructor is to really leverage that that diversity. On the previous slide, you had a picture of one of our class of 2015 students, Kadri Ozen, who works currently at Coca-Cola in public relations, flies in from Turkey. Very interesting background. As an undergrad, his formal education is in health sciences. He's a physician. He's worked at the United Nations. He's worked at the BBC and CNN as a journalist, a producer. And so that diversity of background, even in one individual, is something that as an instructor, my job is really to leverage that and make sure that it's really adding to the richness of the discussion and the experiences of the students.
Absolutely. John, what's that like when you're in the class with different, kind of backgrounds of students, not just where they're from or where they work, but sort of the industries in which they do?
I think the diversity slide only talks to a piece of the classroom experience. Not only do we have a diversity of cultural experience, but we also have a different perspective that each person brings to the class. And because the classes are moderated by professors like Dr. Bowman, they are able to draw out that different perspective. And so it's a learning environment not just from the course material or the curriculum, but you also learn from your peers, and you get that perspective and are able to draw on the not just their perspective, but the depth of their experience as part of the dialogue. That's a very important piece.
I always find it interesting with the Executive MBA program, and particularly the Modular program, not just the backgrounds and the depth of experience, but the additional education. So if you'll notice on the slide, it talks about lifelong learners, other individuals with PhDs and master's degrees and in different areas and backgrounds, and the richness that that must bring both to the classroom learning, but also to the classroom and post-classroom discussions.
Yeah, and it's just, if I kind of think back, so I teach in the fall semester, their second last semester before they graduate. And this past group, so the 2015s, had 2 senior executives from Home Depot.
Right.
And so one of the sessions we're doing was talking about sort of customer experience mapping. You know, the idea of path to purchase. Part of my job is to introduce the concepts, more generally. We're doing a case study. It happens to be in the same industry as Home Depot. And so the students have a chance to, in some ways, chime in from their own perspective, and then we have, these sort of A-team experts that are there to really provide their perspective and their context.
Right, definitely.
And in our class, we had a very broad depth of undergraduate and postgraduate education and training. We had scientists who had PhDs and worked for the CDC on international projects. We had attorneys who negotiated labor contracts. We had a brain surgeon in our class. There were a handful of engineers, and there were finance professionals. And so you could toss out a topic, and everyone would add their individual perspective on that topic. It wasn't just what does the curriculum say or what does the text refer to it. You got to hear what the different perspective of each individual person in the class was.
Absolutely. And I really do think the richness that comes from that, again, it can't really be captured in a slide, but it's also even difficult to articulate. You have to experience sort of the fullness of what that is. Hopefully, though, you've gotten a little bit of a glimpse of what that works through. So we're going to move to talk a little bit about the hybrid approach. The Modular Executive MBA program is a true hybrid in that it is a combination of online learning and in-person learning. And we talk a lot about the flexibility and accountability that comes with that. The ability for you to learn at your will and where you might need to be, but also when you come to class and you're in your residency, to have a different level of accountability to your classmates, to your faculty, and the other individuals you come in contact with. So, Doug, can you talk a little bit about the faculty expectations for students when they're in the class? What does it mean to be in residency?
Yeah, absolutely. So when you're here on campus, it's not like maybe a situation that you would have done as an undergrad or a previous sort of degree where you have sort of soak time. In some ways, we're here, we start the ground running when you arrive on Sunday, and we really don't stop until you leave on Saturday. And so the level and the quality of advanced preparation that we really need each student to bring is really something that you won't have seen or experienced in other sort of formats. Part of our job is to make sure that the students understand that, and then leverage that, and basically make sure that we're using the respectful people's time and using that on campus. Every minute is very valuable, and so we need to make sure that the level of discussion, the level of learning is really, as sophisticated, advanced, and as high quality as it can be.
Yeah, I tend to always reference the idea that when you're here, you need to fully be here. Because to your point, it's only a finite amount of time, and you use every minute of it to your best. John, talk a little bit about the hybrid learning. What attracted you to it, and then what were some of the benefits that you saw, both to the in-person, the accountability side, but also the flexible side with you being an out-of-towner who kind of traveled in?
So the main thing that attracted me to the MEMBA program is that I know personally that I don't learn well just by reading books or studying. It takes a dialogue or an interaction for me to actually get the full benefit of any learning exercise. And I also travel for work quite extensively. And so what the modular program allowed me to do was block out about a 2-week period where I was able to focus very intently on the subject matter for the residency. The there's a lead-up period for each residency, and you have, as Dr. Bowman said, you have to prepare for the residency, because while you're here, it's like drinking from a fire hose. It's nonstop, it's very intense, and it's not just intense between the student body and the faculty, but it's intense between the students. And so what I gained was an opportunity to sit in front of world-class faculty and have a dialogue with them about subjects from marketing, which is not my focus on a day-to-day basis, to finance and accounting, which is something that I'm very familiar with. So the on-campus time for me was very important. What was I worried about the away time is I was worried about the quality of interaction while I was away from here. Mm-hmm. And I was also worried about what we all worry about, and that's freeloading. Neither of those were an issue at all. They were both non-issues. You're working with folks who are professionals, who are very high-performing on a day-to-day basis in their job, and they brought the same level of intensity to the classroom. The distance learning piece is just like this WebEx that we're doing now. It's like the professor's in your office with you at home doing an Adobe Connect call, and you even have a button that you can click to raise your hand. The distance period is very transparent, and I found that the workload during the distance period, the exams, the preparation for the next session, any distance learning exercise, it was well mapped out. It was appropriate, and it was, in a lot of ways, similar to being in the classroom. But it offered me the flexibility, in a lot of cases, to do it on my own time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's great. So while you were speaking there, a question came in. I think you probably answered it, so I apologize if I bring it to you again. We have a student, a prospect, who was asking about what would be the biggest obstacle in completing the Modular Executive MBA program. And I know you mentioned some things you thought would be obstacles that actually ended up not being. But in reality, the program is tough, as Doug mentioned. It's challenging. It's rigorous. If there is a challenge to it, what would you advise a prospect to think about and make sure that they have fully considered when they're looking at a modular program? And then, Doug, I'd love you to answer that as well.
I think there's two pieces. I think the first piece is that you've got to make the commitment to do the program. That's the first piece. So after you have made the commitment to do the program, you've got to convince your family and your friends and your peers at work that I am now going to allocate X number of hours per week to this program, and if I'm not available to go to the opera, to come to your dinner party, to go out with you guys after work, it's because I have made this commitment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's a good way to describe it. It's not to say that the flexibility is going to allow your life to not change, but it is flexible to allow you to fit it into your life, but it is a commitment that you do have to make. Doug, what would you give if you had to think about telling a prospective student what obstacles they should prepare for as a professor?
Yeah, so in some ways, I think piggybacking on what John said, it's really allocating the time and then thinking about it, especially when you're on the distance portions and you're preparing for the upcoming residencies. You really have to put the effort into being very well prepared, because we really, when you're here on the residencies, it's going to be at a very high level. Mm-hmm. And you're not going to have a chance to, in some ways, catch your breath between one class and the other to sort of catch up. And so we really rely on the students to come absolutely prepared.
Okay, yeah, that's a good point. One thing before we leave this, talk a little bit about the time commitment, John, that you experienced. What would you tell on average when you were doing the distance portion? What does that look like? Are they working, what hours of a week are you looking at?
I budgeted between 20 and 40 hours a week to the program. I would try to spend 2 hours a day, either in active reading, research, preparation, a half a day on Saturday and a half a day on Sunday.
Okay.
And I blocked Saturday afternoon, Sunday morning as my time.
Yep.
And it wasn't 40 hours every week. And some weeks when you were doing a simulation or preparing for a big presentation or doing a paper, it was more than 40 hours.
Right.
But I would say on average, you could budget 40 hours a week to the program.
Right. And I think that it's interesting. The way I hear individuals talk about the modular experience is the way that they learn, right? So some individuals are very intense, and they do it in 2-hour blocks every morning, right? They might block off that time to be, studying or in courses, and some people put half day, or I want an entire day blocked off. In reality, on average, they say it's between 15 and 20 hours that you're going to be building into your schedule to it, but that you should build it the way that you study. So there is a level of reality into how you kind of digest the program.
And a way to think about it is whether, it's the same for a full-time program, it's the same for a modular program. You can think about it as, basically for an hour of face-to-face, you're probably looking at sort of 2.5 hours outside the classroom.
Yep. Yeah. And I think that's always good to give a strong perspective, because it is a very rigorous program, and you want to make sure that you're prepared for that. We're going to move on and talk a little bit about the classroom experience. Again, continue to send your questions in. Those are great ones we've gotten, and we'll continue to field them. We're talking about the classroom experience, and that includes everything from case studies and discussions and lectures, but also the collaboration that takes place there. And that's really a hallmark of our program and sort of the way it's built. So, Doug, I think this one is specifically, kind of to your area. The idea of what is it in the faculty prospect? Like when you're building the class and building the classroom experience, what are you looking to deliver? What are you expecting of the students when they're sort of in the classroom? And what would you tell a prospective student is the type of coursework they'll do?
Sure, yeah. And so the courses, there's a mixture of pedagogies. There's going to be lecture discussions, which, and increasingly those are on the distance portion. We want to be respectful of your time. You can do them on your own in some cases. And courses that really lend themselves to that would be some of the more technical courses where we need to get people up to speed for, how do you do accounting, how do you read financial statements, maybe some introductory data analyses. Case studies are a hallmark of any top graduate business program. We'll do them a little bit different when we do them live here on campus than we do them off campus. When it's part of the distance, it'll be in some ways a threaded discussion that's moderated by the instructor. Many of our strategy courses tend to use the moderated case studies.
Okay.
Simulations, John mentioned simulations. So I use a simulation where the student teams compete managing brands against me. And in some ways, it's a culmination of, again, I come near the end of their studies, a chance for them to draw on not just their marketing curriculum, but also their data analysis curriculum that they've done in finance, accounting, operations, et cetera.
So it brings it together.
Absolutely.
John, did you win?
No, we did not. But Dr. Bowman brings a very important point there. He talks about the teams. And throughout the program, not only is it a team program, but it's also an individual program. So you're paired with a team, and you have team exercises, but you also have individual exercises that you're expected to complete. And the team exercises are very enriching from the standpoint of you have to, particularly with a simulation, you have to make a decision, and it's not just your decision to make. So you have the opportunity to work with others from different backgrounds to build a consensus as to figure out which lever in this simulation do I need to pull. And so the intensity of the interaction amongst the cohort is as important as the interaction between the cohort and the faculty.
Right. Talk a little bit about some of the other portions, not necessarily not in the classroom, but that happen when you're in the on-campus experience. So, for example, faculty that bring speakers into the classrooms, or some of the other opportunities you engage in when you're here as a student that aren't necessarily part of the course. Doug? Yeah,
so it's not just sort of speakers in the classroom. We'll also, try maybe 1-2 days a week, bring someone in for breakfast, occasionally a lunch speaker. I admit as an instructor, if there's been a breakfast speaker, a class, and a lunch speaker, and I'm in the afternoon, it gets a little hectic at times. But there's opportunities for speakers not only in the classroom but also sort of co-curricular as well, which I think really adds to the learning environment, because oftentimes speakers, especially for lunch and sort of breakfast, don't necessarily come as a single speaker. They'll almost bring the team.
Oh, nice. Very nice.
Which is a nice thing.
John, do you recall some of those speakers you had some experience with?
The program office does a really good job of drawing on the alumni network to bring in specific speakers. I remember a consulting firm bring their entire team in while we were doing strategy. So you've got the opportunity to have alums who are here in Atlanta, who work for a major consulting company, while you're talking about a strategy session, or marketing folks from Coca-Cola. How valuable can that be while you're doing a marketing class to have a lunch speaker whose major job is the Coca-Cola account?
Right.
And so it's very important that throughout the program we have outside folks who come in and add value to the program because they're alums or because they're friends of the program.
Right. In addition to that, I know that after class is done, you're not necessarily done working. So can you talk a little bit, John, about the that post-class, kind of the group discussion and the group interaction? What does it look like? What are you tackling in those small groups when you're together? Is it just work? Do y'all get a chance to sort of enjoy life?
So it's twofold. Dr. Bowman and I were talking just before we went on air. As the sessions or the program got longer, after we got past about the second session, we actually started showing up in Atlanta earlier on Saturday.
Oh, okay.
And there was an academic piece to that, and there was a social piece to that, because we hadn't seen each other face to face for 6 weeks, and it got to where we actually wanted to see each other on a social basis. Preparation for class is fairly intense. Nobody wanted to show up to class and run the risk of being cold called and not have the answer. So some of the evening meals were populated with discussions about the next day, the case studies. What did you get out of the case study? Here's your question, but what was your perspective of the answer? So oftentimes we had homework. We always had preparation for the next day. What I found a really good exercise for me was to come to Atlanta completely prepared, having read all the material, and then I tried to stay 2 days ahead the night before, rereading the case studies throughout the week, so that because to walk in and be asked a question about a case study, you can't draw on last week's memory. You've got to have those names and the facts fairly well on top of your head. You can take some few quick notes, but to reference notes and talk about a case study in class is not very, very efficient. So after class, we almost always ate dinner together, those of us who lived or stayed on campus here, and so it was two-part. It was social, and it was also course discussion.
Fantastic. And just a little bit of the nuance with it so that prospects understand. How big was your team?
Well, the cohort started out at about 40 people. I think we ended up with about 33 people, and then you end up with 5 or 6 people in each team.
Okay. And you stayed with them the entire 20 months, or that?
The team changes people every other session.
Okay.
And so you have the opportunity to work throughout over the course of the 10 course or residencies. You have an opportunity to work with just about everybody in the class.
Yeah.
And the program office picks the team, and they have an innate knack of putting one engineer, one finance person, one marketing person, and one technology person on a team and matching the teams up really well.
Yeah, and I think if you'd ask them that there's both art and science probably to that process, but definitely
so.
makes that get across. Doug, is there any particular way in which you all as faculty build to teach to a team versus just teaching to an individual?
Well, obviously recognizing that the teams have this built-in heterogeneity, and in some ways encouraging the teams to make sure that you're not in some ways relying on the subject matter expert, that all boats need to rise, and everyone needs to be brought up to the same level of learning and understanding.
And that was actually a question that had come in. You preemptively did that. There was a question that was about, sort of when you're in a team, you can kind of hide, right? You can sort of maybe not necessarily carry your weight, but I think I heard both of you saying that both the faculty do a very good job of ensuring that the entire team gets the benefit of the course, but also in the smaller groups, no one really wants to be the one to come up short.
You can't hide at Emory.
That needs to be a bumper sticker.
You really can't. It is. So as I think I mentioned earlier, freeloading was one of my concerns coming into the program, and it's impossible to hide here. The faculty don't allow you the opportunity to hide. Your peers don't allow you the opportunity to hide. And quite frankly, the folks in the program I don't think there's anybody here who, in my cohort anyway, there was nobody who wanted to hide.
Yeah.
If anything, it was you actually had to make a concerted effort to allow other folks the opportunity to do something, to speak, to put their opinion in it, because everybody's pretty much trying to put their piece into the effort. So very intense, and it's fostered from all sides.
Yeah, I like that word, the idea that the team does foster kind of that mentoring across the board. If you've got a strong finance or a strong marketing person or somebody with a fantastic background in this industry or this area, it really does have a mentoring ability to it, but in a way that, to your point, everyone is a high performer.
Right.
So you're not worried about the freeloading as much as you're worried about balancing and making sure everybody gets a turn.
But that's not to say that when you had a team and there was a specialist within the team, that the team didn't let the specialist do their part.
Yeah.
But the other piece is you also have to be cognizant as an individual member of the team that if there's a subject area where you're weak, you don't want to let somebody else do that throughout the course, because then you're not benefiting from the opportunity to learn.
Absolutely, absolutely.
As an instructor, I'll often, kind of walk around when the students here in residence, and oftentimes they're in breakout rooms. We have a number of breakout rooms here on the floor, and I'll go in there and in some ways eavesdrop on a case discussion or a simulation decision discussion, and I'll pointedly go to this person who's not the subject matter expert in that small sort of group environment and have them sort of articulate their position, their understanding, et cetera. And I actually have a little trick in the sense that, John's class aside, if you do have someone that maybe isn't sort of participating as much, when we get into the classroom the next day, I'll cold call them right away on that same topic. And the other folks, and oh my gosh, you got sort of this person to, I didn't realize they had that much depth.
Yeah.
And so it kind of helps them out and sends a signal to the rest of the class as well.
Yeah, there's some good tactics. There's some good tactics. You've been doing this for a little while, I see. We're going to move on to talk a little bit about the distance portion of the learning. But again, if you have questions about the in-class, continue to send them. We can answer them off camera or weave them back into the conversation. But I definitely want to leave a little bit of time to talk about this distance learning. So the idea that there are teams and faculty connections. But John, you started talking about the technology and sort of the ease of using it and how the distance portion can in some ways feel a little bit like the on-campus portion in terms of the delivery. But let's start with you talking a bit about what does the distance learning provide for you, and what is that experience like in terms of the same thing like classroom? What is the experience with your teams when you're from a distance? How do you do those things?
So what the distance period provides you is flexibility. What it doesn't do is it doesn't reduce the workload. So you have a body of workload that you have to complete during the distance period. And what a lot of people will tell you is when they're through the program, they find that they have learned to hyper schedule. You look at a task and you can immediately figure out how much time you need to allocate to that task in order to get it accomplished. And you actually find out that you have much more free time. For about 6 weeks after the program ended, I was looking around on Sunday afternoon wondering if there wasn't something I was supposed to be doing. The distance portion itself is two or threefold. One, there's preparation for the next session. Two, there's learning from the current session that continues either through online lectures, dialogues, message board type formats, and then there's testing.
Talk about the testing a little bit. Like we get a lot of questions about how do you deliver a test at a distance and what does that look like? So
all but one test throughout the program was delivered during the away portion.
Okay.
We had, I think, one class where we had an in-class. Ben Kaczynski's IT class, he actually gave an in-class exam.
Leave it to Ben to be rogue.
Exactly. And they're almost always open book. But they're structured in a manner to where the fact that they're open book doesn't mean that you can not look at the material all throughout the course and then open the book and complete the exam. The professors really want to see if you understand the material. So either you'll have an exam that works through in, rarely is it multiple choice, it's usually ask specific questions and looking to see if you have grasped the material. Sometimes they're timed, sometimes they're not. Usually I would devote 3 to 6 hours to the exams. A lot of them are 3-hour timed exams. And so you would sit down in the comfort of your home office and work through the exam at your convenience. It was like everything else in the program. You sit down with the syllabus for the exam, for the class, and figure out how you're going to fit everything in. And they do a good job scheduling. So after a residency, you have generally a week to 2 that you're going to have to do exams before classwork picks back up. So the program does a good job of balancing the time allotment there for exams and for coursework following a residency.
And Doug, when you're talking about kind of the delivery of this, can you discuss a little bit about the technology that we rely on to sort of share this information with the students, if you will, and then some of the unique things you think of in relation to your class and how that's kind of provided from a distance?
Yeah, so and sort of the technologies that get used often are sort of will vary across classes. So some classes that are doing an online case discussion will use a different technology than that you want, basically the interactive sort of postings, et cetera, versus other classes that are looking for more of a sort of a face-to-face opportunity. So for example, I'll have group meetings or insert myself into group discussions that the teams are doing off-site. John talked a little bit about flexibility. Sometimes those take place at 10:30, 11 p.m. because that kind of works best for the team. Sometimes it takes place weekday at lunch hour because that works best for the team.
Yeah.
And that flexibility, I think, is really important.
Okay. And I think that's a good point that you brought up, the idea that there are parts that are flexible and parts that are fixed, right? So you might do it from a distance, but it's a set time versus, John, when you all might schedule your teams to meet. And I really do think that has to get back to understanding the makeup of your team and making sure that it's flexible across the board. We've talked a lot about the rigor of the course. We've talked a lot about the delivery models and the distance portion, but the distance does make it flexible. So, John, tell me something, if you think about the program, that the flexibility sort of allowed you to do that maybe an in-course or in-person degree would not have given you the flexibility or the option to take advantage of, whether it be a vacation or different work structure or something that being away kind of allowed you more flexibility to do. I didn't mean to put you on the spot there.
Clearly, by having the 10 Atlanta residencies fixed, and what those 10 dates are when you start the program, it allows you the opportunity to schedule around that.
Yeah. Did you get to schedule some fun stuff?
Oh yeah, there were opportunities for fun stuff and opportunities for work trips. So you get the flexibility to build your schedule around the residencies, whereas every other week or every other weekend that could have impacted travel either for work or for pleasure. If you want to take a weekend off and not do anything during the away period, you can do that. It really all depends on how you structure your schedule. For me, that was the initial draw to the modular program. That, and then while you were here, you were able to focus very intently your time and your efforts on having FaceTime with the world-class faculty that we have here at Emory.
Yeah, and I think that you're right, the being able to plan a bit in advance. And there's a lot of value to that. There's a lot of more flexibility than you might have expected, given the short amount of time. Doug, for the distance learning, before we move on, I had a question a little bit about whether or not there are some things that you have to reserve for the classroom and some things you can deliver from a distance, and how does each class set that up?
Yeah, well, obviously, when you're on site here, the interactive portion, being able to, in some ways, to real time adjust to a comment or take a discussion in a different direction, that's obviously something you can do in the classroom that really you don't necessarily do quite as easily on the distance portion. So in the distance portion, that's where we're seeing kind of, let's get the foundation set. I happen to use, because I'm teaching the second marketing class, some fairly advanced sort of tools, data analysis tools that I need to get up to speed upon. There's heterogeneity in terms of their understanding. Sometimes I need to insert myself into with an individual or a small team, and so that flexibility on the distance portion really is key.
Fantastic. So we're gonna draw this all together. I've gotten 2 or 3 questions about this, and I've pushed you all to stay to the end. So I apologize if you've heard me say we're getting to that. But I want to talk now a little bit about the value of the degree, and not just the value in terms of the immediate, but the long term, and also all the experiences wrapped within that. So John, this is kind of ripe for you, but also really good for the faculty to discuss as well. Talk about the portions of the degree that have that long-term applicability and the longevity of the learning. What does that allow you to do with your career kind of in the short and long term?
So I think there's 2 pieces there. You said short and long term. There's an immediate value to the program. When you are in a statistics class or an accounting class or a marketing class and studying material, it has immediate value that you take back to the office. You look at a problem differently because of a topic that you've discussed the previous week. It really does change the way you think about things on a daily basis. From a long-term perspective, you have the group of friends, the cohort that you've built here with your peers at Emory. You have the faculty who really are not like your traditional faculty from undergraduate, where they stand up here and lecture and all you see is a face behind a podium. Most of our faculty consults in some form or fashion. You have more of a peer-to-peer relationship with the faculty than you do in a pure lecture environment. And if I had a question, a marketing problem, something I was trying to tackle, I could call Dr. Bowman tomorrow and ask him the question and get an answer. And not just him, it's everybody here. And I'm addressing him, Dr. Bowman, today, but rarely did we not have a first name basis with the faculty. I mean, it's Doug, you know, and that takes a little bit of time to get used to when you're first here. Is that it really is? It's a relationship that you're now building, not just with your peers, but with the faculty and with the broader Emory family.
Doug, you've been here for 15 years now, kind of going through that process. So you've seen and built these relationships year over year. Talk about that. What is it like to kind of forge these relationships with the folks who are students in your class, but then get to come back, you know, like John, and kind of be on a peer basis?
Just fortuitously. So yesterday afternoon, where was I? So a class, the class of 2004, the very first member class. An individual runs an IT consultancy that specializes or focuses on the retailing industry. When he was here as a student, I think they had like 100, 120 employees. He's now up to 1,500 employees. So I was out at his office, and we were talking about what are some ways that we can collaborate together. So we've started the analytics center here at Emory, and he's looking to ramp up the type of analytics work that he's providing for his clients. And so how can we create in some ways, a win-win? That's awesome. Get him involved here as a speaker, get him involved maybe sponsoring some student projects in some programs, and looking for ways that we as the faculty can then add value to his business. And
you really can't quantify that. When you say the value of it, it's really hard to kind of explain what that value is. Not just being able to learn from world-class faculty and learn things that will have such longevity, but to be able to reach back out when you need to refresh that, or my question wasn't answered when we were in class, and I want to still have that connectivity, and the idea that you have value to that. One last thing before we sort of wrap this up is the idea of this membership for life. Right? I like to always talk about this as an important pillar of any of the executive MBA programs, our weekend in Modular here, is that you're a part of this community forever. And there are lots of tangible and intangible portions to that, including the ability to come back and do classes afterwards, as well as interact with individuals. Doug, if you can share kind of your favorite, if you will, membership for life kind of memory of this. What would you say a Modular Executive MBA student uniquely is going to get from a longevity of this program that they might not get in another style of program, whether online or in person even?
Yeah, I think we've already really touched on the idea of the network and being able to sort of draw on that, both the network of your peers and your classmates, the network of the faculty, the network of other grads. I see, part of my role too is in some ways making those connections. And so someone from a class of 2004 is looking for, some help or, looking for potentially even a job in a particular industry. Can I connect them up with someone in another year? And so I think the common thread, I think, is really, you talk about sort of the value that you get out of the program too as well. I think the common thread is really that thirst for learning. And that's a connection, I think, that you find transcends graduation years, transcends functional area, transcends sort of perspectives.
That's wonderful. John, I will give you the chance to bring it all home and kind of why Emory? What's the value that's there that's intrinsic that you'd want every prospective modular student to know?
It's one word, and it's the people.
Nice.
It's not just the faculty, it's not just the staff, and it's not just your peers. But when it's all put together, there's something extremely unique about the Emory family, particularly the business school family here, because everybody seems to have a common set of values to help everybody do better. And what I found is, first and foremost, is within my cohort, we continue to talk. It's not a week doesn't go by that I don't talk to a member of my cohort. We agreed before we graduated to meet at least semi-annually, and we followed up with that. We met here in Atlanta last August and went to Delta and did a huge tour of Delta thanks to some members of our cohort. And right now we're planning a meeting in Savannah in April, and we've had very good attendance so far, or commitment for the attendance in April. And it's almost a continuing education that we've committed to. And our plan is to start bringing in speakers so that we have an opportunity to interact with maybe folks from the university or folks outside of the university. And so that that connection that you have here at Emory is different. And that's where you get the value.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a great way to describe it. I want to make sure that you've gotten a chance not just to hear about Professor Bowman and John's perspective and experience here, but also about all the ways that you can kind of get engaged. So there are webinars like this that you can kind of talk with, but there's also information sessions that we host, but most importantly, personal consultations, an opportunity for you to reach out and talk about your own experience with our admissions teams. And so all of that information and more can be found on our website under our Executive MBA portion. There are events that are available both in person and distance, and there are a dozen ways, honestly, to engage with our members of admissions to kind of get this process started. I do want to thank Dr. Bowman and John for their time today and for kind of bringing to life the modular program for folks. I think this is wildly helpful, and I know that based on the questions we've had and the feedback, it's been helpful for folks who've been involved. So thank you all for joining us. Thank you guys for taking some time out of your day to listen in. We hope you will find out more about the program. We will be able to have this chat available for individuals about 7 to 10 business days, so we'll send you the links. You don't have to worry about trying to go find it again later. And we will hopefully hear from you again soon. Thanks so much.